Every war has its generals, its soldiers, and its weapons. But some wars are fought in silence, with money instead of missiles, currencies instead of cannons, and interest rates instead of armies. While history books tell us about World War I and II, the Cold War, and battles for oil or land, there's another conflict that shaped our modern world just as much. It's a war you were never taught in school, a war waged in secret boardrooms, central banks, and on trading floors. This is the secret economic war you never learned about. Most people think of war as something fought with bullets and bombs. But in the modern era, economic warfare became the ultimate weapon, cheaper, cleaner, and often far more devastating. It's a war fought through currencies, sanctions, debt traps, and markets, where the victors don't occupy territory, they control systems. And it's been happening quietly for over a century. To understand how this hidden war began, we have to go back to the early 20th century, when the great powers realized that controlling money was more powerful than controlling armies. At the dawn of the 1900s, gold ruled the world. Every major nation was tied to the gold standard, a financial truce that gave currencies stability. If your paper money could be converted to gold, people trusted it. But gold had one problem: it limited power. You couldn't just print more of it to fund your ambitions. When World War I broke out in 1914, that limit vanished overnight. Britain, France, Germany, they all abandoned the gold standard to print the money needed to fight. It worked temporarily, but after the war, the economic scars were deeper than the physical ones. Germany was crushed under reparations, Britain was drowning in debt, and the United States emerged as the new financial superpower. And that S, when the world discovered something extraordinary. You don't need to invade a country to control it, you just need to control its currency. The 1920s and 30s weren't just about roaring stock markets and a devastating depression, they were a time of monetary manipulation. Britain tried to restore the gold standard to rebuild trust, but to do so, they overvalued the pound. This made British exports too expensive and strangled their economy. Meanwhile, France and the US were hoarding gold, destabilizing everyone else. And Germany, desperate under hyperinflation and reparations, began printing marks until they were literally worthless, a form of financial self-destruction that paved the way for Hitler's rise. By the 1930s, currency devaluation had become a weapon. Nations competed to make their money cheaper than everyone else's, hoping to boost exports. It was called beggar thy neighbor economics. In truth, it was economic trench warfare, invisible, global, and ruinous. The result was the Great Depression, the economic equivalent of total war. After World War II, the victors decided to prevent another global collapse. In 1944, they gathered in a small New Hampshire hotel for what became known as the Bretton Woods Conference. The deal looked like peace, but it was really a new kind of control. Under Bretton Woods, every currency would be tied to the US dollar, and the dollar, in turn, would be tied to gold. It created stability, but it also cemented American dominance. At the time, America held over 70% of the world's gold reserves, giving it enormous leverage. If you wanted to trade internationally, you needed dollars. And if you needed dollars, you had to play by Washington's rules. This was an economic empire, built by design, where the battlefield was no longer land, but balance sheets. By the late 1960s, the system began to crack. The US had spent billions on the Vietnam War and the Cold War. Foreign governments, especially France, grew skeptical and started demanding gold for their dollars, draining America's vaults. In 1971, President Richard Nixon made a shocking announcement. The US was leaving the gold standard. The dollar was now backed by nothing but faith. But faith is a powerful tool, especially when you control the levers of global finance. Within a few years, Washington struck a quiet deal with Saudi Arabia. Oil would be sold exclusively in US dollars. In return, America would provide military protection. This was the birth of the petrodollar system, a new front in the economic war. Now, every country that needed to buy oil, which was basically every country, needed dollars. This allowed the US to effectively tax the world through its currency. America no longer needed to conquer land. It had conquered liquidity. While the world focused on missiles and spies, the US and the Soviet Union fought an even more decisive war, an economic arms race. The US used trade restrictions, currency pressure, and financial isolation to bleed the Soviet bloc dry. The USSR, with its rigid, centrally planned economy, simply couldn't keep up. When oil prices crashed in the 1980s, its main source of export revenue evaporated. By 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, not from an invasion, but from insolvency. It was arguably the greatest economic victory in modern history, achieved without a single shot being fired between the two superpowers. In the decades that followed, economic warfare became official policy. Sanctions replaced bombs, currency manipulation replaced invasion, and financial markets became the new battlefield. The Asian financial crisis of 1997 is a perfect example. Speculators attacked weak currencies across Asia, forcing nations like Thailand, Indonesia, and South Korea to beg for IMF bailouts, which came with harsh conditions. The West called it market forces. Those on the receiving end called it economic sabotage. The pattern repeated itself in Latin America, in Russia's 1998 default, and again during the Eurozone crisis of 2010. Each time, financial contagion spread faster than any army could move. And each time, those who controlled credit and capital dictated the terms of recovery. Today, the weapons have evolved. It's no longer just about gold or oil. It's about data, finance, and control of the global payment system. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the West's most powerful weapon wasn't its military might. It was SWIFT. By cutting Russian banks off from the global payments network, they froze hundreds of billions of dollars overnight. Meanwhile, China has been waging its own quiet financial campaign, building the Belt and Road Initiative, lending huge sums to developing nations in exchange for access to ports, resources, and political influence. It's not colonialism through conquest, it's colonialism through credit. And as tensions rise, both East and West are fighting for control over the future of money itself through digital currencies. The digital yuan, the potential Fed-backed digital dollar, even Bitcoin, they aren't just innovations. They're potential weapons in a new kind of war. The war to define what money is. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You're part of this war, whether you realize it or not. Inflation, interest rates, market crashes, these aren't random events. They are the fallout from a global financial arms race where every nation tries to devalue, manipulate, or control its money to outlast the others. Every time your currency loses purchasing power, every time your savings buy you less, you're paying the price of decisions made in the name of economic security. And the scariest part? In this kind of war, there's no peace treaty, only temporary truces. So what happens next? We are entering an era of open economic conflict. Trade wars, currency wars, and tech sanctions are merging into one global struggle for control. The next superpower won't be the country with the biggest army. It'll be the one with the most resilient financial system. China is actively challenging the dollar's supremacy. The BRICS nations are exploring new payment systems to bypass Western control. And the United States, still the heavyweight champion of finance, is defending its empire through regulation, sanctions, and surveillance. But beneath it all, one truth remains. The world still runs on trust. And trust, once broken, can't be rebuilt with force. That was why every empire that has ever used its currency as a weapon, from Spain, as Silver Empire, to Britain, who was pound to America, as dollar, eventually faced the same fate. Because money, like power, only works as long as others believe in it. So the next time you hear about inflation, sanctions, or debt ceilings, remember, you're not just witnessing economics. You're witnessing a global conflict fought without bullets, where the victims rarely even know they're at war. And as the lines blur between finance and geopolitics, one thing is certain. The secret economic war isn't over. It's just gone digital. Thanks for watching. If you found this look into the hidden world of economic conflict eye-opening, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world. See you in the next one.